They called it the turning point in modern aerial warfare, the day when the skies themselves seemed to tremble under the roar of twin engines and the hum of radar locks. No one knew it would happen that fast. No one expected it to unfold that perfectly. In the cold silence above the clouds, the world watched as technology, training, and human will collided in the ultimate test of air superiority. Long before the sun rose, early warning systems were already awake. Dozens of dots flickered across radar screens, high-speed signatures closing in from multiple directions. It wasn't just another routine patrol. This time, the tension was electric. Command centers buzzed with coded chatter, data streams, and the faint, steady heartbeat of men and women who had trained for years for this single moment. At one base, a row of F-16 fighters waited on the tarmac, canopies reflecting the first light of dawn. Pilots climbed in silently, each one locking their helmets, sealing themselves inside the cockpit, inside the storm. A familiar voice echoed through the comms. "All units, scramble, you're clear for takeoff." The engines roared alive, shaking the ground like thunder. Moments later, the jets were slicing through the clouds, climbing, turning, forming up in tight formation. Inside, the pilots barely breathed. Every word, every signal mattered. Radar contact confirmed, hostile intercepts inbound. The tension was no longer distant. It was here, now, on their screens, rushing toward them at supersonic speed. The F-16 spread out, switching to combat mode. Radar locks flickered on. One pilot whispered, "I have tone." It was the phrase that meant everything and nothing at the same time. It meant the weapon systems were ready, that the line between defense and destruction had vanished. Far above, contrails crisscrossed like chalk lines on blue glass. Two worlds collided, speed against speed, instinct against instinct, machine against machine. A formation of enemy aircraft appeared, powerful, heavily armed, and confident. They had ruled the air for too long, but today, that dominance would be tested. What followed wasn't chaos, it was choreography. Every turn, every dive, every missile launch was a calculation measured in microseconds. A single mistake meant the end. The F-16 pilots didn't fight with brute force, they fought with precision. Years of NATO training, simulator hours, and split-second communication turned the sky into a deadly dance floor. The first missile streaked through the air, cutting a trail of fire. The pilots didn't cheer, they didn't celebrate. There was no time. Each second, new threats appeared, new radar locks flared red. The sky became alive, not with beauty, but with war's mechanical heartbeat. From the ground, commanders watched in stunned silence. The live feed showed the impossible. Smaller, lighter jets maneuvering past larger adversaries, evading radar locks, and firing back with perfect timing. The data coming in was unbelievable. One officer leaned forward, whispering, "They're not fighting like before. They're rewriting the playbook." Up in the air, the pilots barely heard the words. Sweat rolled down their temples as G-forces pinned them to their seats. Every pull on the stick was a test of endurance. At Mach speeds, the difference between victory and defeat was a single heartbeat. Suddenly, one of the radar screens flashed. Multiple bogies down came the call. The voice was steady, disciplined, but the silence that followed spoke louder than cheers ever could. It was working. The tactics, the training, the trust, all of it was paying off. High above the clouds, one pilot broke formation to pursue a lone adversary. The enemy jet turned sharply, trying to shake him off. What followed was a duel that would be studied for years. Tight spirals, vertical climbs, rolls, counter-rolls, each move more daring than the last. The two machines danced at the edge of physics. Then came the lock, The tone beeped steadily in the pilot's ears. He whispered the call, Fox 2. The missile detached, slicing through the cold air. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then the explosion lit up the sky like a second sunrise. Back at command, applause broke out, but the pilots didn't hear it. They were still out there, fighting, focused, unbreakable. Stay alert, their leader said. This isn't over. The enemy, realizing their numerical advantage wasn't enough, began to retreat. The balance had shifted. The skies that had once belonged to them now belonged to precision, to speed, to adaptability. What they faced wasn't just superior machinery, it was superior mind. The pilots regrouped. Their fuel levels were low, ammunition half spent, but morale unshakable. They circled once more, scanning the horizon, making sure no threats remained. The radio cracked. Mission accomplished. Return to base. As the jets turned home, the world below exhaled for the first time in hours. The radar screens cleared. The sound of victory wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, confident. On the ground, engineers, technicians, and support staff rushed toward the returning aircraft, their faces alight with pride and disbelief. One of the pilots removed his helmet and looked at the horizon, where the last streaks of smoke faded into the morning sky. He didn't smile, he just nodded slightly, a gesture that meant we did our job. But everyone knew this was more than just a mission. It was proof. Proof that the balance of power in the air could change overnight. Proof that strategy, training, and courage could rewrite the rules of modern combat. News spread fast. Around the world, analysts tried to understand how such a small squadron had achieved what no one thought possible. Some called it luck, others called it genius. But the truth was simpler. It was preparation meeting opportunity. In hidden hangars and command rooms, people were taking notes. What had happened above those clouds would echo in military doctrines for decades. This wasn't just a story of jets and missiles. It was a story of human determination meeting cutting-edge innovation. Because at the heart of every victory in the sky lies one unchanging truth. The machine is only as strong as the pilot who flies it. And those pilots had just changed history. But the mission wasn't really over. Deep in command centers, encrypted transmissions hinted at a second wave, a counterstrike, or perhaps something even more unpredictable. The world held its breath again. If round one belonged to the new generation of pilots, round two could decide the future of air combat itself. As night fell, the horizon glowed with the faint silhouette of jets refueling mid-air, silent, graceful, untouchable. They were heading back to the front, not for glory, but because that's what warriors of the sky do. They return, they defend, they adapt. The next 24 hours would test everything they'd learned, not just their skills, but their endurance, their discipline, their trust in one another. The sky would once again become a battlefield of minds and machines. And this time, the whole world would be watching.
Darkness fell across the horizon like a curtain, but the war in the sky never truly sleeps. Thousands of feet above the earth, the second wave began to form, silent silhouettes against a sea of stars. Every engine hum, every radar ping carried the tension of what was about to unfold. They were ready again, because air dominance isn't won in a single battle. It's earned, tested, and proven over and over until the sky itself remembers your name. Inside the cockpits, the atmosphere was different now, calmer, sharper. These weren't rookies. These were veterans of a fight that had already made history. Every pilot understood what was at stake. Their previous victory had changed perceptions, rewritten tactics, and now eyes from every corner of the world were fixed on them. In the silence of the comms, a voice finally broke through. Check systems. Weapons live. Maintain formation. It was steady, commanding, and cold. The type of voice that keeps chaos in check. The F-16s rolled into alignment, their afterburners glowing faint orange as they climbed through the night. Far ahead, a new enemy formation appeared, faster, smarter, flying in complex patterns designed to confuse radar. But confusion is only a weapon if your opponent panics. These pilots didn't. They adapted instantly, adjusted angles, switched frequencies, countered the move with precision that looked almost mechanical. At ground command, analysts stared at the live feed in disbelief. The new adversaries were flying with coordinated stealth signatures, using advanced jamming, yet the defenders cut through it, pinpointing, locking, and repositioning with impossible accuracy. They're not fighting the radar anymore. They're fighting the human behind it. The battle began not with explosions, but with silence, the quiet before the strike. In that silence, thousands of tiny signals danced invisibly across frequencies, each one a whisper of data, each one carrying the fate of someone flying through the darkness. Then, without warning, the first missile streaked through the night sky. The enemy broke formation, scattering across altitude levels, trying to outmaneuver their pursuers. But the F-16 pilots didn't chase blindly. They anticipated, predicted. They'd studied every tactic, every weakness. One pilot adjusted altitude by just 50 feet, enough to slip under radar and flank the opponent unseen. He locked on, his tone steady, heartbeat in sync with the hum of his jet. Fox 3. The missile launched. Seconds later, a distant burst of light flashed across the horizon. Another pilot called out, "Splash 1." The tone was professional, emotionless. In the cockpit, there's no time to celebrate. As the skirmish spread across miles of open sky, every move became a duel of intellect. The older aircraft relied on brute speed. The newer ones relied on agility and data. The F-16s used both, the perfect balance of analog instinct and digital intelligence. One by one, radar signatures began to vanish. The once dominant adversaries found themselves outmaneuvered, outthought, outflown. For every counter move they tried, the pilots had already calculated 2 responses ahead.
On the ground, satellite feeds showed what military historians would later call a masterclass in coordinated air strategy. There was no randomness, no chaos, just flawless synchronization. The pilots moved as one mind. Suddenly, an alert cut through the comms. Incoming missiles, Vector 305. The pilots instantly broke formation, diving and rolling in perfect sequence. Flares burst from the jets, streaking across the sky like falling stars. Every move looked cinematic, but it wasn't choreography. It was survival. The first missile missed by inches, detonating harmlessly in open air. The shock wave rippled through, rattling cockpits, but the pilots didn't lose focus. They leveled out, climbed again, and turned toward the threat. "Visual on enemy launch source," said one. "Copy that," replied the leader. "Let's finish this." The group tightened formation, switching to counteroffensive. In less than a minute, radar locks reappeared, precise, stable. They fired as one. Trails of fire shot upward, disappearing into the clouds. Moments later, a flash illuminated the night, followed by silence. The kind of silence that means dominance. Back at base, technicians watched in awe. "They just reversed a missile ambush," someone said quietly. The commander nodded but didn't speak. He knew what this meant. This was no longer just defense. It was control. The hours passed. The sky slowly turned from black to deep blue. Dawn was coming again, the second sunrise over a battlefield of clouds. The radio buzzed softly. "Fuel status green, area secure." It was over. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't just a victory. It was a message. a message that modern air warfare had evolved beyond expectations. Technology had finally met courage, and together they had rewritten the sky. As the F-16s began their descent, the pilots stayed quiet. Fatigue began to settle in, but adrenaline kept their focus sharp. Ground crews waited with lights guiding them home, faces lifted toward the approaching jets. When the aircraft touched down, the engines slowly whined to silence. Canopies opened. Pilots climbed out one by one, each face marked with exhaustion and something deeper, that quiet understanding of what they had just achieved. Around them, engineers and officers gathered, trying to piece together the full scope of what had happened. Dozens of sorties completed, 0 losses, multiple enemy aircraft neutralized, systems performed flawlessly. It wasn't just a battle, it was proof that preparation, adaptability, and precision could overcome any odds. One pilot leaned against his jet, eyes fixed on the horizon. The world was changing, and he had been part of that change. He knew that somewhere, someone else was already analyzing their tactics, planning the next move, designing the next machine. But for now, this moment belonged to them. Far away, in quiet rooms where strategies are drawn and rewritten, leaders were already reacting. The display of efficiency and control in that airspace would reshape doctrines, training, and defense investments worldwide. What happened above those clouds wasn't the end of a war. It was the beginning of a new era of competition. News reports later would call it a technological triumph. Experts would debate radar algorithms, engine thrust ratios, and missile guidance systems. But the pilots themselves would never speak in such terms. To them, it was simpler. You fly, you adapt, you survive, you protect. That's all. When asked later how they managed to outfly such advanced opponents, one pilot smiled slightly and said, "We stopped thinking about the fight. We started thinking about the sky." Because that's what true air dominance means. Not destruction, not victory, but understanding. The sky doesn't belong to the fastest or the strongest. It belongs to the one who knows how to move through it with purpose. The hangars buzzed with quiet celebration. Technicians checked systems, refueled, recalibrated. The jets that had just returned to base gleamed under the rising sun, worn, scorched, but unbroken. Each one carried a story written in smoke and steel. And in that moment, the world below began to shift. News anchors spoke of technological revolutions, analysts of shifting power balances. But behind all the numbers and reports lay something deeper, the human pulse of progress, the unshakable desire to rise higher, to master what others fear. That night, when the sky went quiet again, a single thought echoed through command rooms and hangars alike. This was not the end of the story. Because somewhere beyond the horizon, new aircraft were being built, new pilots were training, and new strategies were forming. The race for the sky never ends. It just evolves. And high above, where sound fades and the earth curves away, those who once fought tonight would someday meet again, not as enemies, but as symbols of what human ambition can do when it reaches the clouds. The engines cooled, the lights dimmed, and the base slowly returned to calm. But the memory of what had happened, the precision, the unity, the courage, would live on forever. For every generation that looked up at the sky after that day, one truth remained unchanged. The future of air dominance belongs to those who never stop learning to fly.